We did segments regarding different, particularly the few verses that the Arminian promoters use to mold and shape their theology to promote this idea of hypothetical universal atonement. Now, I say hypothetical universal atonement because sometimes Calvinists that are overly zealous and they want to refute the Arminians and show how wrong they are on these views misunderstand universal atonement when they assert it. Because the doctrine of universal atonement is not really held by no Arminian that I know, that I've ever, dialogued with, because universal atonement is flat out inclusivism. Universal atonement would teach that everyone is saved, not will be saved. That is not the majority of Arminianism. That is not what Jacobus Arminius taught. That's not what any of us that I'm aware of, any documents assert that I can find historically. That view wasn't asserted in or refuted in the councils or the canons of Dort. Even today, that is not the view of most Southern Baptists who are Arminian. It's not the view of others who are non-Reformed or Calvinistic. Inclusivism is held by a very minority group, like I think it was Carlton Pearson. He came out with his view, inclusivism. It also denies hell, where the death of Christ produced salvation for everyone's included in Jesus' atonement. That's universal atonement. So when you accuse Arminians of universal atonement, think about what you're saying and pay attention to the words that you use and the concepts, or you'll look foolish, you'll be ridiculed. Rather, the Arminian, generally speaking, because there's all kinds of Arminian views, but generally speaking, by and large, it seems that most Arminians hold to not universal atonement, that would be inclusivism, or even universalism, but rather a hypothetical universal atonement, which says hypothetically Christ died for everyone, but it's in theory, as long as you believe and make the choice and do all these things, you will be atoned for. But that decision rests in your hand. Okay, that's hypothetical universal atonement. Don't confuse the two concepts. And many, again, overzealous Calvinists or new Calvinists, that want to refute the Arminians, they talk so fast, they're not thoughtful, they're not circumspect in their own doctrine. And we don't want to be embarrassed. We don't want Calvinists embarrassing other Calvinists that know what they're talking about. Now, they're both wrong. Universal, whether it's hypothetical or actual, they're both unbiblical. So I'm not suggesting that one's a little better. I'm just saying there is a theological distinction, and we want to be honest in our scholarship. We don't want to misrepresent groups or people or statements. Okay, that's carelessness. You don't want to do that as a Christian. We worship a God who calls himself truth. We want to be truthful and accurate in our presentation, and we want to be scholarly. I mean, we want to give a positive presentation of what we believe. And we want to give a positive presentation of accuracy. And if we refute a particular view, we want to make sure we're correct, or we're the ones who are in error, because we just don't pay attention enough. We're not read enough, right? We're just not well read. We're poorly read because we just, throw around these terms and phrases and all these things. So let's be clear that most Arminians hold to hypothetical universal atonement, not universal actual atonement. No Arminian that I know would say the atonement was actual for every single person. They'll say, you got to believe. Okay, that's not actual, that's hypothetical, right? Both of those doctrines make my blood boil because they're so false. It's so disruptive to the crosswork of Christ, which was a definitive act. If we had more time, we would go through the linguistics of Paul's theology using the preposition hooper, on behalf of. Christ died on behalf of, in their stead, the elect. But I want to focus, and we'll do some other verses, on this one verse because it was brought to my attention not too long ago. Now, the Arminians normally use to promote this whole Christ died for everyone, and all you got to do is believe, theology, or theory, I should say. It's not a theology. First Timothy 2:4 is one of their big guns. 1 Timothy 2:4, which says God desires all men to be saved, right? Which is easily refuted by the context. Of course, John 3:16, and I think we went over John 3:16 before, because doing a linguistic lexical analysis, we find that John 3:16 is really a promise for the ones who are already believing. It's not an invitation. So put your signs down at the Laker game of John 3:16. It's not an invitational verse. It's really a absolute promise for everyone now believing. They shall never perish, but have eternal life. Okay. So 1 Timothy 2:4, John 3:16, right? And of course, we can't forget the verse that I see on church walls in big banners, 2 Peter 3:9. Not willing any should perish, but all to come to repentance, right? Who can forget that one? But there's another one, and I think this one may be more challenging for the person who holds to the sovereignty of God in election view. That's us. I'm a Calvinist. I hold to the sovereignty of God in election because Paul held to it, because the Old Testament authors held to it, because Isaiah held to it. A substitutionary atonement in which Christ specifically dies for all the ones that the Father gives him. He doesn't die for the ones that were not given to the Father. They're justly judged. They're righteously judged because of their sin. And when they die without Christ, right? But another one that they use, Arminians, is Hebrews 2:9. I'll read it. It basically reads the same in virtually all translations. But, now of course, I'm going to read the whole passage. Rarely is the whole passage or context ever cited. But we do not see him, but we do see him who was made for a little while lower than the angels, namely Jesus, because of the suffering of death crowned with glory and honor, in order that, or so that, by the grace of God, now listen to this last phrase, by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. So first of all, don't get tripped up by that term might, that subjunctive verb here, might. We have an in order that clause. It's called grammatically a hina clause. The purpose of something was for the result of something else. It's a purpose and result clause, right? Namely, Jesus, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor. The purpose of that was in order that, by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. And the might grammatically follows the subjunctive or the hina clause. Nevertheless, we have this phrase, huperpantos gousetai thanatou. Literally, on behalf of all, right? On behalf of all, might taste death. Okay. This last phrase is normally taken, ripped out of the verse, ripped out of the context, and just thrown at you. See? It says, he will taste death for everybody, that he may taste death for everybody, right? And I had this question posed to me not too long ago, and I think it's important that we look at it, and we do, like we would any other verse, a contextual analysis, and ask the question, what does it mean? Does it mean that Christ died for every single person? Because that is what's asserted. right? That Christ died, he tasted death for every single person, right? And that would be consistent with the Arminian hypothetical universal atonement. Also, I would say it's also consistent with inclusivism and actual universal atonement, because Carlton Pearson and others, they use these kind of verses. They use 1 John 2:2, where it says he is the propitiation. In fact, they will interpret it correctly. They'll say, look, 1 John 2:2, they'll say he is the propitiation, not will be. And that's my argument to Arminians. The verse is not a future tense in 1 John 2:2. It says he is, estin. The present tense verb is used. He is the hilasmos, the atoning sacrifice, the propitiation. Not will be, but he is. You cannot get around the present tense verb there. It doesn't lean any way toward a hypothetical situation, a hypothetical propitiation, right? But see what the inclusivists do. They'll look at the word world and say, see, he's the atoning sacrifice for the entire world. Pretty much everyone's saved. Everyone's included. Well, here it says he may taste or might taste death for everyone. Now, normally, the Arminian will present a hit and run argument. Hit and runs are when someone will just throw out a passage, and then before he can even respond to it, they'll go to another passage. It's hit and run theology. Okay, some Calvinists do it too. You don't want to do that. We want to be circumspect. Again, we want to be thoughtful. We want to be contextual. We don't want to be accused of being pretexters. We don't want to do that. We want to treat passages exegetically, accurately, so we can benefit, right? Not only ourselves, but we can benefit the one to which we are speaking. So normally these are hit and run verses that Arminian impose. Not that other groups don't engage in hit and run citing, but Hebrews 2:9, of course, is part of a context. It's part of chapter 2. And Hebrews chapter 2 is part of the book of Hebrews. And the book of Hebrews is part of the New Testament, right? It's part of the entirety of the scriptures. You can't just hit and run. You got to look at the entirety. And I would submit that from Genesis to Revelation, the sovereignty of God in salvation is made clear. The sovereignty of God in salvation is such a crystal clear doctrine. It's like the Trinity is not found in one passage. We look in the entirety of the biblical revelation. Well, with the sovereignty of God in election, we have just that. We have a crystal clear presentation that God is sovereign, not man. He does not put the decision, he does not give the decision of salvation to man and say, here you go, you person who is in bondage to sin, you person who has no ability, I'm just going to give you the decision. I'm going to leave that in your hands. He doesn't leave the decision of salvation in the hands of sinners, because nobody would believe. All right, so let's look at this passage. Okay, first of all, as with any word, and we're gonna look at particularly the word pas, which in Greek means all. It's pantos, but we're gonna look at the adjective pas, which means all and every. But as with the Greek adjective pas, which means all, right? We have that in this passage. Tasted death for all, right? And nouns such as cosmos, the world, right? And all words, actually. If you leave these words hanging contextless, right, with no context, any meaning can be applied. Any meaning can be applied to any word, including a meaning of cosmos or pas of universality. See, it means every single person. But I think we went over this before, looking at the word pas or all and every. I mean, it's in so many different senses, linguistic meanings. To be like the Amplified Bible, to commit the fallacy, as Carson says, the fallacy of illegitimate totality transfer, where you get a word and you apply every single meaning in every single case. Okay, that's a hermeneutic fallacy. You don't want to do that. We want to take words in its context. That's how words are defined. When we see the word all, we have to ask the question, is it all kinds? Is it all every single person? Or what does it mean? If you take the word all every single time and you say, see, it means every single person. You can have great difficulties interpreting different passages, like in Acts, where Paul is said to be a witness to all men. You know how many men never heard of Paul? Same with the word world. World, cosmos, is used in over a half dozen different ways. It could mean the world of non-believers, like John chapter 1, the world hated him, right? I think John 1, is it John 1, 9 or 10? The world hated him. Okay, obviously it's not talking about the author. The world of non-believers. It can be talking also about the world of only believers. John 1:29, right? And I believe in John 3:16, the world of believers. It can be talking about the world system, right? Don't love the world, says John. He says that in 1 John. Don't love the world or anything in it. Well, is that the same world that he wrote in John 3:16, where God loves the world? Well, obviously not. World can also mean creation, generally speaking. He created the world, right? So my point is, it's used in so many different ways. Context rules. That's your rule tonight. Context governs everything. Everything. Every word meaning, every nuance, it's context. So as with the Greek adjective pas and the nouns like cosmos, if left hanging with no context, any meaning can be applied to it. But here in Hebrews 2:9, and take note of this, here in Hebrews 2:9, the extent of huperpantos, on behalf of all. I wrote an article not too long ago about huper and substitutionary atonement, how Paul used the preposition huper to denote the definiteness of the work of Christ on behalf of all, on behalf of them, or in their stead. Christ was delivered up on behalf of them. And it's in many different there's quite a number of passages where Paul uses it to teach the substitutionary atonement of Christ. That means he literally substituted himself on our behalf, on the behalf of the ones that the Father gave him. We have it here in Hebrews. So the extent of huperpantos, on behalf of all, or on behalf of everyone, for which Christ tasted death, is indicated by the context, not just the verse where you just wrench it out of context, right? And you don't comment about the context. That's called a pretext. So let's examine, by the defining context, the phrase huperpantos, on behalf of all. First of all, according to the author, this isn't long, we're almost done. According to the author, who is included, who is the huperpantos, on behalf of whom? The author of Hebrews says all. Okay, all of whom? That's the question. Well, let's look. Verse 10, all those who are sons of glory. How about this one? Verse 11, all those who are sanctified, quote, who are sanctified from one Father. Obviously, that doesn't mean every single person. Similar to John 6:37, where Jesus says, all the ones that the Father gives to me, they come to me. And whoever comes to me, I will never, ume ekbalo exo, never, not a possibility, cast them out. Right? So all those who are sanctified from one Father, that's verse 11 in Hebrews 2. In verse 13 of Hebrews 2, all those who the children whom God has given to the Son. All those who are the children whom God has given, right, to the Son. Again, similar to John 6:37, all the ones that the Father gives me, they do come to me, right? So the huperpantos, that's what we're looking at. Who are the all on behalf of? Well, we just saw they're the sons of glory, the ones who are sanctified from one Father. In verse 13, children whom God has given to the Son, all of those. Also in verse 15, all those whom Christ, quote, set free, who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives. All the ones that were set free, he tasted death for. All the ones who were set free. That's verse 15. And look, it gets worse for the Arminian. Verse 16, all those who are the descendants of Abraham. That's verse 16. All of those. Tasted death for all of those, right? And then verse 17. On behalf of all those for whom the Son made propitiation. So, yes, I mean, you look at these things, the hupopantos is defined by the context. All of who? All the sons of glory, all the ones who are sanctified from one Father, all the who are the children of whom God has given to the Son, all those who are set free, all those who are descendants of Abraham, verse 16, on behalf of all whom the Son made propitiation. All of those. That's verse 17. So you see, it's a definite all. It's every person in terms of the ones in these categories, the sanctified ones, set free, the Abraham's descendants, all of these. Right? That's the defining context. That's how the author explains who the hupopantos are. The extent of hupopantos on behalf of all of these. Right? So yes, Christ tasted death for everyone inclusively. That is, he made propitiation or tasted death on behalf of all the ones that the Father gave to him, to whom the author calls sons of glory. So you see, a simple reading from verse 10 to 17 defines who the hupopantos on behalf of all are. And to interpret it any other way is simply pretexting because of your theology. So let's be careful and let's be students of the Word, right? And let's honor God with our interpretation and not do the careless thing and just wrench verses out of context. And let's be smart about it, but let's be God-honoring about when we look at the text over here. We'll do another short segment on the other ones, like 1 Timothy 2:4, and then I think we already did John 3:16, but we can do that again, and then we'll look at 2 Peter 3:9 subsequently. God bless. Keep in context. Keep the